All right, let's get started from where we left off last class period. We were talking about the canopy of water above the atmosphere. This is known as the canopy theory. Now, the canopy, whatever was up there, is now gone. So this is not something we can show you or test or demonstrate or prove. It's only a theory, but I think it's a very reasonable theory. The Bible talks about the water above the atmosphere. It mentions it in Psalm 148 as waters that be above the atmosphere, above the heaven, meaning there might still be a canopy of water above the stars. Since nobody knows how far it goes, we'll have to just wait till we get to heaven and figure that out. I forget what one guy said. Well, what if it isn't up there when you get to heaven? I said, well, then I'll try to get the message down to you, wherever you are at the time, to tell you about it. So definitely, the Earth today has 6 distinct layers, and everybody does rocket scientists or earth science or atmospheric science will tell you, yes, there are 6 layers to the Earth. It's a good thing, too. The layering to the atmosphere, we have an ozone layer that blocks out certain things, and each of these layers does different things for us. For one thing, just the thickness of it is an insulating blanket that burns up most of the stuff coming in from space. Meteors, etc., they burn up in the atmosphere. Without that, it'd be just like the moon. You know, the full force of the meteor hits, you get nothing to slow it down. They say about 5 meteorites hit the Earth every day that are as big as maybe a softball. Since the Earth is 70% water, of course 70% of them land in the water. Occasionally people get hit by them. It has happened. Buildings get hit by them more frequently. But this canopy that's, I think, alluded to in the Bible, and we'll give you the evidence for and against the canopy theory tonight. If there was a layer of water above the atmosphere, certain electromagnetic frequencies cannot penetrate water. Visible light goes right through, radio waves go right through, but ultraviolet light and X-ray radiation cannot penetrate through water. So the theory goes that this canopy above would do several things for the Earth. It would increase the air pressure, and it would filter out the sunlight and give you none of the harmful effects of the sunlight. So this to talk about the canopy theory. The Bible also says there was a layer of water under the crust of the earth. It says in Psalm 136, "To him that stretched out the earth above the waters." You never hear that verse preached on, and I don't know how long it took me to catch that that's in there, but I thought, wait a minute. He stretched out the earth above the waters. What is this saying here? Now some idiots have tried to say, see, the Bible teaches the earth is flat and it's on top of a layer of water. That's not what it says. It doesn't say the earth is flat, does it? The Bible clearly says the earth is round. Psalm 24, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein, for he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods." There's another verse indicating when God first made the world, it was built on top of a great body of water. So there must have been more water inside the earth. Now, those who object to the canopy theory, the biggest objection they get, and I talk to many people who do not like the canopy theory. I shouldn't say many. There are a few creationists who don't accept the canopy theory. They will say the reason is if you had enough water up over the atmosphere to rain down and cover Mount Everest, the heat generated would cook the world. Now see, when moisture turns to water and condenses, it releases heat. If you're turning water into moisture to boil it, it absorbs heat. So when something changes from a solid to a liquid to a gas, there's a heat exchange. So when going from a vapor to a liquid is called the latent heat of condensation. That might be a good bonus question. Latent heat of condensation, it releases heat. Even though it turns to water and it falls down and it feels cool when it hits you, it's actually released heat to go from the vapor to the liquid state. You have to release heat, you have to take heat away to get something to go from a liquid to a solid state, freezing. Okay, so here's their objection. Enough water to cover Mount Everest condensing would fry the world. What are the errors in that logic? You're assuming you have to cover Mount Everest. Mount Everest wasn't there, right. And all of these straw men, these scoffers set up, you know, are easy if you look at it. Wait a minute, Mount Everest wasn't there. The Bible says in Psalm 104, during the last part of the flood, the mountains arose. The mountains weren't there. What's the second problem with this? They're assuming all the water came from up above. When the Bible clearly says the earth was founded upon the waters, and that's where most of the water came from. If you read Genesis chapter 7, same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So here we have, it says the rain was upon the earth 40 days. But if you keep reading in Genesis chapter 7, you'll see the water kept coming up for 150 days. Obviously, it's not all coming from above if it's only raining for 40 days. So they always set up a straw man and say, see, all that water to cover Mount Everest would produce so much heat. And they do all these elaborate mathematical calculations, and they're correct on their calculations about how many joules of heat would be, or energy would be released. And that's all correct, but they've got a straw man set up. Yeah, you're right, it would fry the earth. However, all that water didn't come from above. It only rained 40 days. And probably an awful lot of that rain during that 40-day time was being recycled because the climate was all messed up. You'd have had evaporation and rainy cycle started. Some of it might have come down as rain from when the fountains of the deep broke open, the water shooting up into the atmosphere, and it's raining down. So I don't know how much actually came from the canopy. You'd only have to have, people argue about the thickness all the time, so I hesitate to give a number. But most people say somewhere between 4 and 10 inches of ice would be sufficient to produce the effects of filtering out the radiation. Now, what held it up there is the other objection. I don't know. I don't know anybody who knows. There are a couple of theories about it. Several planets today have vapor canopies that cover them completely. Venus is covered by a cloud cover. Clouds, of course, are 100% water, and they float just fine. If you get water droplets small enough, the surface area is so great compared to the volume, they simply can't even fall. They have to have something to stick to get enough mass together so they can fall. And you have drizzle droplets that form into, I forget the sequence, drizzle droplets to some other kind of droplets, cloud droplets to, maybe it's the other way, cloud droplets to drizzle droplets to rain droplets. They have to slightly get bigger and bigger, and then pretty soon they fall. Well, most of the water, I think, came from inside the crust of the earth. So the fallacy in the argument is they're assuming all the water comes from the canopy. Not true at all. Most of it came from inside the earth. The earth today still bears scars. The San Andreas Fault, the mid-Atlantic ridge, that crack right there is a crack that was 46,000 miles long. Runs completely around the world, like a seam on a baseball. And it's a real crooked path, which is why it's 46,000 miles long, and the Earth's only 25,000 miles around. But this rip is probably one of the places where it ripped open. I read an interesting article about somebody who was up in a skyscraper when the 1906 San Francisco earthquake hit. They happened to be looking out the window of their skyscraper, and they saw the ground about 20 miles away. The whole city, the ground and everything, was rippling like a wave. Everything's just lifting up and dropping back down. And they saw this wave come, and all of a sudden their building went and everything fell down, and they survived it. But they described this as seeing the ground itself waving, just like the oceans. Yes, sir?
I was in an earthquake that literally saw the ground go like that.
Yeah, it just goes up and down. I've only seen pictures of it. I've been in 2 minor earthquakes, never been in a big one. But if they say when one of the earthquakes that hit the San Andreas Fault, they checked how fast is the crack moving. If the ground cracks here, how long does it take before the crack moves 100 miles away? And I forget, it was at phenomenal speed. It was like 2 miles a second. That's how fast the crack moves. If you have a tightly stretched cloth, you stretch a cloth real tight, all of a sudden it begins to rip. How long does it take the rip to go all the way down? Well, it depends on all sorts of factors, how tight is the cloth and how much pressure is on it, stuff like that. But the ground in earthquakes will rip at incredibly rapid speeds. So according to Walter Brown, this crack probably circled the earth in a matter of less than an hour. 46,000 miles. I've seen high-speed movies they take of balloons popping. You get a balloon and you make one hole in one spot. How long does it take for that crack to go all the way around the balloon? Not too long, right? It happens pretty quickly. Or an eggshell breaking. How long does it take for the crack to circle the egg? That's the kind of effect you would have here with the fountains of the deep breaking open. And the Earth today still has what are called continental plates. And when you study earth science, you study the different plates. It's interesting that most of the volcanoes, represented here by the red dots, most of them are on or near a fault line. And so their conclusion is, well, the fault line is causing the volcano. Maybe so. I don't know. There are a couple other theories. You want to read something very fascinating. You need to get Walter Brown's book, In the Beginning, and just read through that, his explanation of what's called the hydroplate theory about the magma being trapped when the fountains of the deep broke open. And that's still causing volcanoes today. And the likely place for it to come out is where one of the cracks are. San Andreas Fault, I remember standing right on top of that when I was in Lompoc, California. I was driving through the country and I went over the San Andreas Fault. I stopped and you stand there and you look down both directions and you see this massive crack. And you're thinking, I mean, up these mountains beside it are, you know, really big mountains. You're thinking, man, what if this thing had another earthquake right now? Pretty scary thought. My mom and I stayed in the motel in Alaska where they had the 1964 Alaska earthquake. It happened 30 feet away from this hotel we were in. We were up on the 13th floor, I think. The church put us up in this motel, you know. And you look out the window and they said what happened? The whole section of the city dropped down 30 feet. So they just smoothed it out and planted grass, and now there's a hill there, where before it was just flat ground. We were just looking out the window, looking right down that hill, just 30 feet away from here to that, you know, deck.
How deep is that? Right.
San Andreas Fault varies all over the place. It finally runs out into the Pacific Ocean, just north of San Francisco. Where you were there with them. Did you go see Muir Woods when you were out there? Petaluma, just north of. We were there in just a few weeks ago, right? Yeah. They say California's going to drop off into the ocean. Well, first place, it's just a little piece of California that would be affected, and it's not going to drop off. It's going to slide northward. And that's not so bad, except when it slides, all the rock, you know, moves and everything falls down. The crack is probably, who knows how deep it is, apparently down to where it changes into liquid, maybe 20 miles, 30 miles.
So why don't they, instead of drilling, why don't they do experiments there?
Well, there have been theories tested or attempted. There have been, theoretically, they thought, you know, the reason that earthquakes happen is because the plates are pushing against each other. You do an experiment where you get two blocks of wood or two things that are going to have a lot of friction, two erasers here. If I pull one down like this, they slide past each other. What if I push them together real hard and then pull down? When it finally builds up enough pressure, it jerks. If there wasn't any pressure holding them, it would just slide past each other. But the sliding will cause it to jerk if there's more pressure between it. So what you have here is two massive blocks of earth sliding, and as they build up pressure, and all of a sudden it jerks. It may only move a foot, but the energy released, you know, knocks down buildings for 50 miles. And sometimes they move side to side this way. Other times one drops down. If one drops down, it'll make a big cliff called an escarpment. They have those all over the world where obviously it had an earthquake and a section, you know, dropped down. There are several different types of fault lines. I used to know them when I taught earth science. It doesn't matter. You won't need it for the quiz. Okay.
Excuse me, Sam,
Yes, sir.
on that slide you just had there, what are we looking at as far as, are we looking at from an aircraft of many miles away, or are we looking at where, how wide is this crack?
That varies greatly. I would say the total width of this picture at the foreground here where you're looking is probably 2 miles. It's taken from a high altitude plane. The mountain ranges, you know, you're driving across relatively flat terrain and all of a sudden you see this mountains where it's been built up from probably from the abrasion of the rubbing.
So what's running down the center of it? Just some kind of...
No, it's all fills in. As soon as it cracks and slides, you know, the next rainstorm fills it in with dirt and you can't even tell it's there. It's not like it's an open crack you can look down into the earth. It's closed tight. They build highways over it, and when an earthquake happens, you can see a lot of places where the earth has moved and they had to, you know, rebuild the highway because it moved over 5 feet. Or fences will be off by, you know, 6 or 8 feet.
So you just kind of, like, got a valley running down through the center of the...
Yeah. You drive up in the mountains, drive down the valley and up the other mountains and out the other side. And if you didn't know what you were looking at, you would think you just drove over some hills. And in some areas, the San Andreas Fault's hardly noticeable. It's not like this all the way along, but an awful lot of it is. Pretty noticeable crack in the ground. Okay, the greenhouse effect is what happens when you have something that lets light in and the energy is absorbed by the ground and then it's re-emitted and it comes off as a different kind of energy wave, and so it's trapped. It can only penetrate through the glass one way. A layer of carbon dioxide above the Earth would make what's called the greenhouse effect. A layer of water above the Earth will do the same thing. Environmentalists are all nervous about, us burning all the fossil fuels and producing greenhouse gases, which is true. If all the cars in the world running today and all the factories burning all these fossil fuels are producing greenhouse gases that go up and they hover in the atmosphere. What they don't tell you, the people who are nervous about, save the environment kind of stuff, the plants absorb this kind of stuff. In many countries, they don't have pollution control on their cars at all. They plant certain kinds of trees along the highway. It absorbs all the pollution. Norwegian maples are great at absorbing pollution. They thrive on it. So the more pollution you get, the faster the trees grow and they absorb it faster. So, but of course the American solution is, make you pay $2,000 extra for your car so it can't run as good and you can't work on it anymore. And you open the hood and you don't know what's under there. You don't recognize a thing. That's the way. I remember in the days when you could open the hood and you knew what you're looking at. We used to work on cars all the time. But today you got to have a computer to tell you which part of the computer's gone bad. Okay, if the Earth had a canopy of water overhead, some of the scoffers or skeptics about the greenhouse or canopy theory will say it'll cause what's called a runaway greenhouse effect. The heat just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter. This room has lots of windows in it in our gazebo. Before we had the air conditioner put in, you would get the runaway greenhouse effect in here. It could be 100 outside and be 140 in here because it just gets hotter and hotter and the heat can't escape. It has to do with the long wave, I believe it's long wave radiation. I'll get it backwards, I know, and somebody will write me about this. Heidi, you handle the call. Because I didn't look this up before the class, but I know where to look it up. Education is knowing where to look. It's not knowing everything. It's knowing where to find everything. It's either shortwave radiation comes through the glass and heats up the room, and then the long wave radiation is emitted from that and can't penetrate back through. Is that the way it is? Shortwave will go through water. Long wave will not. So that's what's called the greenhouse effect. Okay. Hope you're right, because I'll get calls on this one if you're not. I could look it up. Karl Baugh, and I get blasted by creationists for even mentioning Karl Baugh, but he's a great godly man. You haven't met him yet, have you, Eric? Next time you drive across Texas, stop and see Karl Baugh, because there's nothing to see driving across Texas. But he was pastoring a very successful church in St. Louis area, and he moved to Texas and bought some of the property where the footprints are found with dinosaur and human footprints together, and has a museum there. And he gets, he has his share of skeptics, like anybody trying to do something for the Lord. You get people who want to fight against you for some reason. But he's a very nice guy. He's a godly man, loves the Lord. And my philosophy is, if you disagree with somebody about something, call them and talk to them first, okay, if you can. So I've talked to Karl Baugh many times, been to his museum and seen it in the middle of Glen Rose, Texas. But he's got an interesting book out called Panorama of Creation. Now, when I talked to Walter Brown, who's also a creation scientist, he said, I know Dr. Baugh very well. We've talked about this in great detail. And what he has here is some interesting speculation, but no hard evidence. Well, I understand that, and that's why we call it the canopy theory. Okay, I can't prove it to you, but it answers some basic questions. Scientists, by the way, I was recommending here that you do get Karl Baugh's book and read it if you're interested. It's about $10. Panorama of Creation. He thinks the canopy of water overhead before the flood would cause several interesting factors. It would be photoamplifier, which means they could see the stars better than we can. For one thing, if you ever look at, you ever been driving on the highway when it's real hot and you see the little lines coming off the highway? That's the hot air is distorting the light coming to you. Well, the air is 200 miles thick over our heads right now, and just looking at a star, the star twinkles because the air is bending the light coming from the star. That is known as atmospheric twinkle. It actually bends the light about 0.046 arc seconds, which, you have a degree and then 60 minutes in a degree and 60 seconds in a minute. So 0.046 arc seconds is not much, and who cares? Anyway, the light gets bent coming from the stars and causes the star to twinkle. If you compressed the air down to, say, 10 miles, 10 miles is still a lot. I mean, I get up in airplanes every week, and we never get over, 4 miles high or 5, maybe 6 miles high. 10 miles is way up there. So let's just assume that the canopy of water, or ice, whatever it was, compressed the air down to 10 or 12 miles. Now you have much less atmospheric distortion because the air is compressed. It's not free to move. And you have no weather patterns. Because what causes the weather is you have hot air masses and cold air masses and things are moving around, and you couldn't get a thunderstorm in the Garden of Eden, I don't think. If the canopy theory is true and you had extra air pressure, you'd have perfect weather all the time. You'd have springtime all the time if the Earth were not tilted. Today the Earth's tilted over 23.5 degrees. That causes our seasons. If the Earth were not tilted before the flood, and I don't know if it was or wasn't, but this is just the theory, and that it was struck by something that started the flood, which I cover in video number 6, that caused the Earth to wobble around and finally tilt at this new angle they're at today. Before the flood, it would have been March 21st, that type of weather, spring weather, all the time, every place on the globe. Slightly warmer at the equator and slightly colder at the poles because the Earth is still curved and the sunlight would still strike at different angles. So that would still cause some effect. There might even have been some ice caps around the poles that were smaller. There are some animals that seem to be very thoroughly designed for living in cold weather. So some people say, you know, that there was no ice before the flood. I don't know if I'd buy that or not. But they do find some enormous vegetation, fossils, evidence of vegetation at the poles, which we get into on video number 6. Anyway, they got a new theory out that says a lack of oxygen killed the dinosaurs. Now this article is worth reading the whole thing. Let me read this to you here. Dinosaurs weren't done in by a giant asteroid, as one theory holds, but by a change in the atmosphere that meant there wasn't enough oxygen to support their inefficient respiratory systems. A new theory suggests. A new analysis of air trapped in 120-million-year-old amber found in east central Minnesota casts doubt on the notion that the dinosaurs starved to death after a giant asteroid hit the planet 65 million years ago, sending up dust that blocked the sun and killed plant life. Dinosaurs were already on their way out by the time the meteor purportedly hit, says Gary Landis, a U.S. Geological Survey geologist, and one of the 4 scientists presenting their theory at the Geological Society of America's annual meeting today. The dinosaurs did not keel over with their feet up in the air, but they found it increasingly difficult to compete in their environment. The theory also carries implications for humans because it presumes that worldwide atmospheric changes can occur 10 to 20 times faster than previously thought. Let me stop right there and make this comment. It would be a neat scrapbook to have, to keep articles every time they say, this overthrows all the old theories. New fossil find, you know, overthrows previous theories. Because there would be one from every week. They're constantly overthrowing some old theory, but they don't ever quite, you know, ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, the Bible says. They don't ever quite get all the way to say, oh, maybe the Bible is right after all. Okay, let's continue here. Landis and his colleagues tested air found trapped in the amber in east central Minnesota. They found that the proportion of oxygen in the atmosphere fell from a high of 35% to a low of 28% within the relatively short time of between 300 and 500,000 years. It would be like taking a dinosaur for a stroll from sea level to 6,000 to 7,000 feet, Landis said. The oxygen-rich air resulted from volcanic activity, which pumped out carbon dioxide, which was converted into oxygen by plants. Now hold it, let's stop right there. Does he know that? I encourage kids, when I go to public schools and speak, I'll read through part of their textbook and I'll say, no, wait a minute, is this what the author knows or is this what he thinks? You can see where they freely mix their science and their religion all the time. A lot of this is good scientific stuff, and then he mixes in his religious, well, this is what caused it. Now wait a minute, you don't know that. Okay, let's keep going here. Oxygen-rich air resulted from volcanic activity. I don't think he knows that. Dinosaurs evolved during this time when oxygen was plentiful and had a weak respiratory system, according to the theory known as the Pele hypothesis. Pele is the Polynesian goddess of volcanoes. Now this paragraph is important. An 80-foot apatosaurus had nostrils the same size as a horse. Now how is an 80-foot animal going to get enough air through nostrils the same size as a horse? The two things confusing about dinosaurs are their nostrils are too small and their lungs are too small. Those would be two good quiz questions there, Heidi. Two things that indicate dinosaurs had a different environment to breathe in. Smaller lungs, smaller nostrils. An 80-foot dinosaur could not survive today because he simply couldn't get enough air. You ever had a real bad cold and you could barely breathe through your nose, and it's, you know how hard it is to try to get a breath, okay? That would be the problem for the dinosaurs. Their nostrils are too small. We do know dinosaurs lived. We do know they got to be huge from the bones we find. The question is, when did they live? I don't think it's even worth arguing about what they look like. What color were they? I don't care. Don't know. Let them, you know, let the toy makers make them any color they want. It doesn't matter. When they lived, that matters to me. Amber is petrified tree sap. There are several ways things can be preserved as fossils. One is preserved in amber. What are some other ways fossils can be made? Preserved in rock. Preserved in ice, frozen in ice. Think of any other ways? Formaldehyde. Mummified. There have been things found mummified, just dried out. They you know, died in a dry climate, and so they dried out, turned to like leather, and survived just fine. A lot of fossils we find are petrified by the mineral soaking into the bone. Some are just a casting of the animal. Animal falls in the dirt, makes an impression in the dirt hardens, but he rots. But you have the impression left behind. That's called an impression fossil. And who cares? Anyway, the insects trapped in amber, according to the article here, have 35% oxygen. Now the air we're breathing right now is about 21% oxygen. This has been tested many times. You can take a candle burning on a little container with water around it, like get a big bowl, put a candle in there, and let the candle burn, and then put a glass over it. But don't have your glass quite touch the bottom of the bowl. Leave it up just a little. As the candle burns, it'll burn up all the oxygen, and it'll actually suck water up into the jar. How many have seen that before? And you measure how much oxygen's gone, you know, and you find out about 21% of the air we're breathing is oxygen. You can also do this with a mouse on top of a little block of wood inside there, and as he breathes up all the oxygen, slowly it comes up, and the mouse, pretty soon he keels over. Then you have to do mouth-to-mouse resuscitation. The air, apparently, from this evidence, we find the air before the flood was richer in oxygen. Now, if you combine these two possibilities, richer oxygen from pre-flood, of course, I believe the amber formed from the trees that were broken during the flood. When you break a tree, sap's going to ooze out, right? During the flood, you're going to get all kinds of broken trees. And you're going to get sap oozing out every place. Insects are going to come stick on the sap. Sometimes birds are found in petrified amber. Sometimes frogs are found. Insects are by far the most common. Interesting, all the insects they find are exactly like the insects alive today. And they will say, wow, isn't it amazing they didn't evolve at all in 80 million years? They don't even stop to consider that maybe they're not 80 million years old. You know, they don't even stop to consider that. You know, they know the evolution theory is true. This debate I was in a few weeks ago, I forget who it was now, but I said, what you guys have is a theory that you're convinced is true, but all you need now is some evidence and a mechanism for how it'll work. You got the theory down, now you need some evidence and a mechanism. It's just so ridiculous that they believe that stuff. Doubling atmospheric pressure and increasing oxygen does some neat things to your bloodstream. Your blood has little red blood cells in there that carry oxygen. When it's oxygenated, it turns red and it goes through the lungs and picks up oxygen. And then the mechanism of how the body absorbs oxygen and releases oxygen is absolutely amazing. That would take billions of years to evolve, of course. And before it evolved, nobody lived. They all died while they were trying to evolve this complex oxygen transport system. But the oxygen, the red blood cells have a maximum carrying capacity. They can only hold so much. One of the problems with sickle cell anemia, which is a disease that only black people get, the red blood cell, instead of being shaped like a donut, it caves in so it looks like a sickle, like a part of a moon, a crescent moon. Now you have much less surface area, so it holds less oxygen. So a person with sickle cell is very likely to have a very difficult time breathing, or at least carrying oxygen to the body. And it's very often fatal, people with sickle cell. We had a girl, you don't remember her, Eric, you were too small, but a girl rode our bus in Illinois, in Kankakee. Her mother and her father were brother and sister. Her mother was 9 when she was born. Her father was 10. It was her incest. Okay. Well, she had sickle cell anemia. She rode our bus, sweet, godly girl, loved the Lord. She lived to be 13 years old and died. She was sick a lot during those 13 years and finally died at age 13. Sickle cell is where the blood cell collapses and it won't carry enough oxygen. But if you get enough pressure, not only will your hemoglobin and red blood cells carry oxygen, your plasma actually absorbs oxygen. Now, plasma is the juice that your blood is, the liquid part of the blood, not the solid part like the platelets and the red blood cells and white blood cells. It's the liquid part. You can donate plasma. Anybody done that before? Donate plasma? They stick a needle in, take your blood out, and they spin it in a centrifuge, I believe, to separate the solid particles, and they put those back in. They just keep the liquid part, plasma. The advantage of using plasma is it doesn't matter what blood type you are. If a soldier is shot on the battlefield, you don't know what blood type he is, well, give him plasma. That'll certainly help. You have about 1 pint of blood for every 15 pounds of body weight. So a 150-pound person has 10 pints of blood, a little over a gallon. Gallon and a quart. So if a guy's been shot and he's already lost, 4 pints of blood, he's only got 10. It starts to get pretty serious pretty soon. Anyway, under double atmospheric pressure, plasma gets oxygen saturated. So I say in the seminar, before the flood came, if you had double the air pressure and increased oxygen, you could run for hundreds of miles without getting tired. As your body gets depleted in oxygen, you begin to cramp up, especially if you can't carry away the lactic acid from the muscles. That's what causes cramps. And who cares? It's not biology class. But anyway, Jessica McClure, and there's still a controversy today about how she ended up down in that well. She was 18 months old. There were 2 neighbor kids, I believe neighbor kids, that were 5 and 6 years old playing over there. Some people think, they shoved her down the well. Because how do you get an 18-month-old kid down in an 8-inch pipe? Nobody knows. However she ended up down there, she was stuck in this pipe. Maybe, how many saw the movie about Jessica, baby Jessica stuck in the well? They've played it on TV a couple of times. The problem is her left leg was down in the pipe, and she did the splits and was down in the pipe 20 feet down. This is an old abandoned well. I don't know how deep the pipe was altogether, but it was just amazing the way they rescued her. Had to dig a tunnel beside it and chisel over, but the rock is just real hard rock in that region. And so they finally got her out of the well. Well, she'd been down there nearly 2.5 days, 58.5 hours in this well. Lots of her body was black from lack of circulation. You can see on the picture here the black spots where blood wasn't circulating. This does the same thing as frostbite or fire. Freezing or burning has the same effect on your skin. It destroys it and it dies. Lack of oxygen will do the same thing. If you ever sleep on your arm wrong or something and you wake up and it tingles real bad, ever done that? Or sit on your foot for a long time and just tingling? You've cut off the blood supply and the lack of oxygen to the tissue there. Well, Jessica, after being in the well for 2.5 days, they said, we're going to have to cut her leg off. One doctor said, well, hey, before we cut her leg off, let's put her in a hyperbaric chamber for a while. These were invented, I believe, just for scuba divers that come up too fast. If you're down under water, everything's pressurized, including the air in your lungs is pressurized. And the air in your blood gets pressurized. So after you're down underwater swimming around, your body gets used to this pressure, and you feel just great. But if you come up real fast, those little tiny air bubbles in your blood grow because the pressure's let off. If you put a balloon in a pressurized chamber, the balloon will shrink down. When you relieve the pressure, the balloon will come back up. It responds to the pressure. What's happening in your blood, these little tiny air bubbles are going around, no problem, everything's fine. But blood vessels come along and they split and branch off like tree branches. Every time they split, they get smaller. Eventually, you get out to the capillaries, which are extremely tiny, and there's zillions of those all over your body. Well, you have an air bubble that normally flows right through your capillaries and everything, but now it's 4 times normal size. It's going to come along and plug up the hole because it can't fit through the hole. Well, wherever that blood was going is now not getting any blood. And so what ends up happening when a person gets what's called the bends, they get so many of these thousands of little air bubbles all over in their body, it's plugging up capillaries or arteries every place, and it shuts down their circulation. The heart's still pumping, but you shut the valves off. It can't go anywhere. And so you got two solutions. Get them cold. In the old days, they would take scuba divers that come up too fast and got this disease. They call it the bends. They would put them in ice, put them in a bathtub full of ice. What happens to air when it gets cold? Shrinks. A little more humane solution is put them in a chamber and pressurize it. Now you have to be careful, because when you change pressure on the body, things get hurt. Your eardrums, little piece of skin with air on both sides of it. You build up pressure on the outside, it's going to pop in. You build up pressure on the inside, it's going to pop out. Now to equalize the pressure, anybody know what the little names of the little tubes are that help equalize the pressure in your ears? Eustachian tubes. Little tiny tube, you won't need that for the quiz, but they go from the inside of your eardrum to the inside of your nasal cavities. So if you're going up and down the mountains, you know, and you're getting, ears are hurting, you hold your nose and blow. By doing that, it blows air through these eustachian tubes and equalizes the pressure. Little rabbit trail, I like to chase rabbits. When babies are born, the slope of the eustachian tube is different, because their nose is a different height than their ears. As you grow, these change position a little bit. So in babies, the eustachian tubes are pointed down just a little. So any infection gets in there, runs out to the ears. As an adult, it's going to change position, and it's going to run into your nasal cavities, and you swallow it, and you never notice it. So the solution, if the eardrums, or if it's packed, if the eustachian tube is packed from this fluid behind the ears, the kids are going to get ear infections. Any pressure changes, the eardrum stretches, and the kid screams, ah, because it's hurting. Your eardrum is stretching. Many years ago, teachers would box, they'd say, I'm going to box your ears. Come up behind some kid and bam, slap the side of his head. Now what's going to happen? You got a column of air right here that you are now compressing suddenly. It's going to split the eardrum going in, right? Thomas Edison had his ears boxed as a kid and was nearly deaf the rest of his life, which is why a lot of his inventions had to do with hearing type things to help people hear better, because somebody boxed his ears. Okay, we'll get into more Jessica in just a moment. Let's take about a 3 or 4 minute break. All right, let's talk more about these hyperbaric chambers. This one holds one person. They slide the person in. It's all glass so the person doesn't get too claustrophobic. But these were used, maybe even developed for people who got the disease called the bends. That's from coming up too fast, relieving the pressure, air bubbles build up, shuts off blood supply, and you die from lack of circulation to the various tissues. Baby Jessica was put into a hyperbaric chamber, pressurized to 2.18 atmospheres. Now in America, we measure our tire pressure in so many pounds per square inch. In most of the rest of the world, they measure it in atmospheres. If you go check your tire pressure at the gas station in Germany, they'll stick the gauge on and say, you got 2 atmospheres. Well, what is that? Okay, 1 atmosphere is 14.7 pounds. That's at sea level. Because there's enough air above us right now that we're living at the bottom of an ocean of air. If you get up to the top of the ocean of air, you'll be gasping for breath. You won't be able to breathe up there. And if you leave, you'll really be gasping for breath. The pressure of this column of air, 200 miles thick over us, is about 14.5 pounds, 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's an enormous amount of pressure. If you figure how many square inches of body you have, that's an awful lot of pressure. If you take a can and you remove all the air from inside, it'll cave in just because of the air pressure. You do these experiments where you can, drop a piece of burning cloth or burning paper inside a can and put the lid on. As it burns, it creates a vacuum, slight vacuum, removes 20% of the oxygen, sides cave in. Did that stuff for science class all the time. Okay, they put Jessica in one of these chambers and filled it up full of pure oxygen to 2.18 atmospheres. Within a few hours of forcing oxygen into her system, her leg turned pink. Most of her skin was saved. What would have been a very serious illness or a very serious problem from all the lack of oxygen turned out to be fine. The largest chamber in America that I've been able to find is in Pensacola, Florida, University Parkway. In an emergency, they can hold 30 people at a time. There are over 400 hyperbaric chambers in America now. the vast majority are located along the coastlines. Why would that be? That's where most of the scuba divers are going to be, right? Many big cities, though, are getting hyperbaric centers, hyperbaric treatment. I called these folks here. There's their phone number, 850-969-7990. And they said you have to get a doctor's order to get in there. You can't just go try it out. And it's about $16,000 for a complete set of treatments, which is 2.5 hours, I believe, per treatment, and 20 treatments, if I have my facts, or something close to that. So 2.5 hours times 20, how many hours are you in there? 50 hours for $16,000, $800 an hour. And they're going to pump it up to high pressure oxygen. You could do similar effects, not quite the same. They do it just by getting helmets, like divers' helmets, like the old-fashioned big metal helmets the scuba divers would wear, and pressurize just what you're breathing. In no sense pressurizing your arm. I mean, it's not absorbing any oxygen anyway. So you probably could do this a lot cheaper. And some places have just the pressurized hyperbaric helmets that you wear. In West Germany, they're treating stroke patients with hyperbaric treatments. Because a stroke is a blood clot or something that stops circulation to part of the brain. And so since its lack of circulation is the problem, you pressurize oxygen and healing takes place much faster. In England, they're treating multiple sclerosis with hyperbaric treatments and getting amazing results. In France, they're treating diseases like arthritis with simply forcing oxygen into the system. In India, they treat leprosy. There's a couple of websites here, hyperbaric.com if you want to check it out to learn more about hyperbaric treatments, or the email hyperbaric1@earthlink.net. But you can get information. Yes, sir?
Actually, it conducts surgery in hyperbaric chambers now. Duke University has a chamber actually about 2/3 the size of this museum.
Who has one? 2/3 the size? Duke University? And they conduct surgery inside the chamber. So the doctor and everybody's pressurized. Interesting. This is a fascinating article. I'm tempted to read the whole thing. Let me just read you a few key ingredients out of here. Oxygen halves, or cuts in half, the infection rate. They said right here, the air is about 21% oxygen, but patients routinely get 30% oxygen during and after surgery because lungs don't work well under anesthesia. The study tested whether a richer mixture would improve the outcome. It says they boosted oxygen to 80%, and it made a tremendous difference. Normally, surgery is done with a patient breathing oxygen, but he's only breathing 30%. They said, let's try it at 80%. Everybody was worried the lungs would collapse, but they found absolutely no problems in the study. It tells about it here, just released a few months ago. It says in this circle here, there was also an unexpected benefit. Patients who got extra oxygen were half as likely to be nauseated after surgery. Interesting. And it's just fascinating to read the whole thing about, I would recommend when you get the videotape, just hit pause right there and read that article because it's really interesting. This is a small chamber that only holds one person. A lot of professional teams have their own hyperbaric chamber. Dallas Cowboys have one. New York Jets. Now, why does a football team need a hyperbaric chamber? Promotes healing. Exactly correct. And they've discovered, sure enough, their injured players will heal twice as fast. Now, you figure it's going to cost them roughly $500 to $800 per treatment to put the guy in there. But if that gets him back on the field 3 weeks earlier, and you're paying him $10,000 a minute to go out there and play with that ball, you don't care what it costs to get him well. You want him well, right? You want to get your own chamber to keep at home? This is a hyperbaric sleeping bag. Michael Jackson has, Michelle Jackson has one of these. Says it's going to make him live forever.
Double atmospheric pressure.
You can't quite get up to double atmospheric pressure, but you do get much higher oxygen.
How do you get oxygen in it? I mean,
Well, it's got a little oxygen cylinder. It pumps it in.
how do you get the pure oxygen?
You can go to welding supply shops and get a bottle of oxygen. I got one in our bedroom. Remember, we had one for Mom. We just took the hose while she was, healing from this tailbone injury. We would just, sleep with oxygen just barely flowing, just to increase the oxygen in the room. It wasn't pressurized. Didn't see any dramatic results, but adding oxygen to the system helps. There's a clinic in Dallas. It's in my seminar notebook. If you get the seminar notebook, the section in there about cancer called oxidative therapy. One of the things they use to help treat people with of all sorts of diseases is add hydrogen peroxide to their water and drink it. Hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. Water is H2O, so hydrogen peroxide is an extra oxygen is all it is. And when it breaks down, it turns into oxygen and water.
You drink it?
I've drank it many times, not pure. I'll take a glass of water, and now if you get, Walmart hydrogen peroxide, it's only 3%. 97% of what you buy is, you're buying a bottle of water, 3% is hydrogen peroxide. At some drugstores, you can still get 30% hydrogen peroxide. That's the strongest I've heard of, available, over the counter. But some of the drugstores, in the old days, they would sell hydrogen peroxide, 30%, and people would, just rub it on their head and bleach their hair out. If you gargle with hydrogen peroxide straight out of the bottle from Walmart, it's only 3%. It kills, you feel your mouth foaming up, all the germs and stuff are being killed. What's the toothpaste that, it's got hydrogen peroxide is a big thing now to add into toothpaste because it kills germs. And germs are a living organism. Germs get on your teeth from the food you ate, and they're attacking the food, trying to break it down. They're doing their job. The problem is a germ is a living, breathing organism. Eats, sleeps, reproduces, and goes potty. But guess where he goes potty at? In your mouth. That's where he's living. And so that's the primary cause of bad breath is bacteria doo-doo. Good motivation to brush your teeth when you're done eating, right? You got a few bacteria in there, don't you? Yeah. There's a website that sells all sorts of things, but topicsgallery.com, T-O-P-I-X, if you want to read more on hyperbaric chambers. Just listen to this one testimony. This person says, I have never felt healthier or more rejuvenated than I did stepping out of this chamber for the first time. My skin was tingling. My nerves were calm for once, and I had a clarity of mind unfettered by stress and worry. We may not have found the proverbial fountain of youth here, but this is as close as it gets. By increasing the uptake of oxygen in the body, the hyperox chamber has been clinically designed to help the body function better. There's a lady who goes to Calvary Baptist Church here in Pensacola over on by the fairgrounds. What's the name of that road? Pine Forest Road. Okay. She, little short lady, she was in some kind of bad accident, and they said she's going to die anyway. Let's put her in a hyperbaric chamber. And you're not supposed to be in for more than a couple hours. They put her in there and left her in for 56.5 hours. And she says that is probably the world's record for anybody being under hyperbaric treatments. High pressure oxygen, 56.5 hours. I believe she said she was in there 58 hours or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting Jessica confused because it's real close to the same. But she's fine today.
Was she blind?
No, not blind. They worried about extra oxygen causing blindness. She says, I have absolutely no side effects.
Why would oxygen?
I'm not sure how the oxygen makes blindness. You know how that...
I don't remember all the ins and outs. My late wife, they used the hyperbaric for her problems, and that was one of the concerns.
One of the concerns was blind. I think it's capillaries in the eyes itself.
It's actually, I guess, a contraction or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the deal was, but there was.
That's one of the things with diabetes too. The circulation, they lose extremities, toes, fingers, legs, and eyes also often go with diabetes. But these chambers, you get in and pump it up. Of course, you probably have to have somebody else put you in and out, of the chamber. They now have a new model with slightly larger window, so people wouldn't get quite so claustrophobic. But it's about $3,500 if you want to get one. Carl Baugh is the only source I have for this information. And some people say, where's the evidence? I want to see the evidence. I don't know that I can prove this. I'll just say, call Carl Baugh. I've seen in his office when I was there pictures, and I don't have a picture. All I have is a drawing. But there is a picture from a magazine in Japan of experiments done by Dr. Kei Mori at Keio University. And this is all right on the newspaper article there that he's got hanging on the wall. I photographed it. Didn't come out very good. Hardly visible on the photograph that I took with the $10 camera I bought for the occasion. But I'll try to get a better picture. The story says that Dr. Mori was, of course, in Japan, property is extremely expensive. A little bitty apartment may cost you $2,000 a month, So he lived in a basement apartment. No windows. But the Japanese like to raise plants, you know, little bonsai plants and all this kind of stuff. So he started raising a tomato plant in his basement, but had no windows. Since he worked at the university, he got a piece of fiber optic cable from the physics department. And he ran the fiber optic cable from the roof down through the wall to light his plant. How many have seen those? Mom has one on the piano, doesn't she, where the lights turn under it and the little fiber optic, looks like a little tree, the light comes out the end of the fiber optic cables. He was lighting his plant with fiber optic cable. The plant began growing faster than normal and producing more fruit than normal. So he thought, wow, why is this happening here? He theorized that possibly the fiber optic cable only allows in light, it won't allow in ultraviolet light. It's blocking it like sunglasses block UV light. And so he moved this plant to his university and put a plastic shield over it, which would do the effect of blocking out UV light, like sunglasses, okay? A UV blocker. He also knew that plants breathe carbon dioxide, and so he built a little sock around the stem of the plant that he could pressurize with carbon dioxide. Kind of like pumping up a little tire around just the stem of the plant, not the leaves, okay? If he could have done the leaves, it would have been much better, we assume. He pressurized CO2 to the stem of the plant. After 2 years, and again, according to Dr. Baugh and according to the article sitting on the wall of his place, which is from a newspaper, after 2 years, the plant was 16 feet tall and had produced 907 tomatoes. They moved it to a shopping center, built a bigger plastic shield over it, and again, they're only pressurizing carbon dioxide to the stem. To pressurize a room this size would be very difficult. You know, the windows are going to blow out, it's going to find a leak someplace, okay? You can't, there's really problems with getting large pressurized systems. One of the problems they have with spacecraft going up into a vacuum, you know, it's a big bubble up there ready to pop. The story goes that they still have these seeds for sale, and it's still a big deal in the town of Otama and Aki. They need to learn to get real names over there, you know, for you know, like Chicago, stuff like that. But these plants can still be purchased in these towns where they have extra large tomato plants that produce an extra amount of fruit. And so, according to the story, the plant kept growing, and the last time it was reported that I heard about, it was 40 feet tall and had produced 15,000 tomatoes during its lifetime. That wasn't per year, but during its lifetime it had produced 15,000 tomatoes. Now the tomatoes, it's a cherry tomato plant, but his were baseball size. I mentioned this in my seminar, and a guy came to see me from University of Terre Haute, Indiana. He said, Mr. Hovind, I believe that's where it was. He said, Mr. Hovind, I just finished getting my PhD in botany, raising plants. He said, what I did for my PhD dissertation is I studied soybean plants to see how many beans they produce if you increase the carbon dioxide. Normal air we're breathing is very little CO2, 0.06%, not much. Well, plants have to live on this. That's all they get. And they don't have lungs, they can't breathe it in, they got to wait till it drifts by to absorb it. Well, if you pressurize CO2 and you increase the percentage, plants are going to grow like crazy. Now, the more plants grow, what do they put off? Oxygen. That's why you always feel refreshed when you go walk into a forest, you know, invigorated, like, wow, you know. They say if you put real plants in an office building, everybody works better because they get more oxygen. They stay alert longer. The increased CO2, this guy told me he put 0.09% CO2. Instead of 0.06, it's 0.09, 50% boost. He said his PhD dissertation dealt with this topic. He said his soybean plants produce twice as many berries, they call them a soybean berry, twice as many berries as regular plants. And he said, I only gave it a 50% boost, and I didn't even pressurize it. It'd be a neat science fair experiment for some kid to do, would be to raise some plants inside a terrarium, glass cover, as a control, raise identical plants in another one, and every morning break off a little piece of dry ice and drop it in. Dry ice is solid carbon dioxide. And that's what plants breathe. As it vaporizes, it'll produce lots of CO2 in there. You know, plants can only use so much. It's like you say, you know, would my car run faster if I had a 400-gallon gas tank? No, I can only use so much at a time, right? And plants can't use, 100% CO2 wouldn't help more than 50%. Somewhere along the line you would reach what's called the point of diminishing returns. I don't know where that is, but that needs to be experimented on. If you try 0.09, 2%, 3%, and see where it starts to lose effectiveness, because now you've reached the saturation point. The plant just can't absorb anymore. But that'd be a neat experiment for some kid to do for a high school science fair project. Okay, so the cherry tomato plant indicates that things were very different before the flood. I suspect this canopy of water explains why we had so much vegetation. Dr. Eugenia Scott is the president of an organization who's dedicated to keeping creation out of public schools. It is called the National Center for Science Education. The liberals and the communists always pick some name like that, for the people, or the American way, They always make it look like they're good guys. Just by the name, they try to deceive people. National Center for Science Education is actually a private organization started by Andrew Carnegie to keep creation out of the schools. I suspect there's a bigger picture here. Our founding fathers believed that we've got rights that come from God. And when you get folks believing they have rights that come from God, they don't make good slaves. And so if you want everybody to be enslaved in a new world order, you have to get those people to believe there is no creator, and your rights come from the government. So evolution is really an essential teaching for those who would like a one-world government. And guys like Carnegie, the billionaires, they would like all the money in the world. They have most of it, now they want the rest. Okay? And so it's to their advantage to make sure evolution is taught, because it keeps the people dumber and keeps them easier to enslave with the big government programs. Okay. Dr. Eugenia Scott, anyway, is the president. I debated her on the radio in November of '93. During the 1-hour program, and I've got the audio tape of it, I believe I got to speak about 9 minutes. She monopolized the entire conversation. I was trying to be a gentleman, assuming she was a lady, Next time, it'll be different, Jeannie. Let's try it again sometime. I will demand equal time, okay? Anyway, she said in this debate, she said, now, Dr. Hovind, you say the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Do you realize, and here's a quote from her, there are 80 separate layers of coal in the Midwest. Let me stop right there and say, she's right. If you look at the amount of coal in the world, the entire biomass of the world today could not possibly be converted to that much fossil fuel. Let me stop again and say, she's right. Trees and plants and grass, when you smash it under enormous weight and pressure, turns to coal. Nobody argues that coal comes from plant material. I don't know, maybe a few out there, but I don't know anybody who disagrees with that. Okay, almost everybody agrees plants turn to coal if they're buried deep enough. It is true, if you took every tree in the world today and buried it, you couldn't produce all the coal we have. Two true statements here. 80 separate layers of coal. There's not enough trees today to make all that. She said, there had to have been an enormous amount of time involved. Oh, stop right there. What's the problem with her logic here at this point? What? Doesn't take a long time to make coal. Assuming a constant production of biomass, but a major assumption is she's looking at the world today, which is 70% underwater. Was it that way when God created it? Where was most of the water that today is in the oceans? Under the crust of the earth. Let's just assume the earth had several conditions different when it was first made. Let's just assume that it was only 20% oceans and 80% water, or land. And let's assume there were no massive ice caps and no massive deserts. And let's assume you had greater plant growth per acre because you have increased air pressure from a canopy and you have richer CO2. Now you're going to get 50 times more vegetation per acre and zillions of acres available for this vegetation to grow on. People often make the assumption, Eric, when you get into debates and stuff, that they will say, how did he get kangaroos all the way from Australia to Noah's Ark? What are they assuming in that sentence? Assuming they had to start off in Australia, right? And they're assuming Australia was separate from the rest of the world.
They're assuming there wasn't Australia.
Assuming there wasn't Australia, right? People say, where was the Garden of Eden? I don't have a clue. They say, well, it had to be near Baghdad because, you know, they got the Tigris and Euphrates River. Now, there's a faulty assumption in that. They're assuming it's the same river mentioned in the Garden of Eden, in the Bible. Didn't people come from England, come over here and settle this place and call areas New York, named after York? Is that the same place? No. It reminded them of that place, so they gave it that name, right? New Hampshire. There's thousands of cities in America named after European cities. There's a Moscow, Missouri. Probably what happened after the flood, Noah's family got off the ark and they said, you know, that river looks like the Euphrates River. Let's call it Euphrates. Okay. They got to decide. I mean, they're the only ones left, you know. Pick any name you want, right? They're calling the shots. And so people, they read the Bible and we got to be careful and we don't assume things because you make a mess out of the truth. So she's right. There's too much coal to be formed by the trees today, but she's wrong to say it would take an enormous amount of time. What it would take was a different world with lots more trees, all destroyed in a flood. Now, during a flood, what's going to happen to trees? They're going to float for a while until they get waterlogged and they sink. How badly torn up they are will determine how fast the water soaks in. What species they are determines, you know, how fast the water soaks in. All sorts of factors involved here. But they're going to slowly settle out and form a layer of trees at the bottom of this ocean during the flood. Meanwhile, you've got more sediments dropping down because it's muddy water from the fountains of the deep being broken up, and it's going to cover these trees. Now you have another layer, what's called a log mat, a big pile of floating debris. It's going to float by and drop off another few hundred feet maybe of broken tree branches, leaves, etc. And that's going to coalify. And they find seams of coal up to 100 feet thick. The thickest I've ever read about is 120 feet. Have you been down in a coal mine yet, Eric? You went down in a gold mine, right? Up in Birmingham, a guy took me down inside the coal mine where he worked. We had to go down at 3 in the mornings to make sure, you know, it was okay with the boss, because the third shift boss was a little more lenient there. But we went down in this coal mine way down there, and he said, now, hang on to something, I'm going to shut the lights off. When he shut the lights off, it was so black. I was going, where is everybody, you know? He said, you can stay down here for the rest of your life and you'll never see your hand in front of your face. Your eyes will never get used to this because there is no light. But as we're going through this coal, where we were, it was maybe 12 feet thick of solid coal. You could see logs had been pressed into the ceiling and pressed into the floor. Whole logs, 80 feet long. And sometimes you'd see pieces of logs coalified sticking out of the sides where they hadn't dug them out yet. Just solid. It was the neatest thing. In the old days, they would dig coal out with a pick and shovel, you know, and the guys got to see things that are found in the coal. Many years ago, they developed a machine that's about the size of this room, and the driver is 22 feet away from the auger that's grinding up, eating its way into the wall and putting it onto a conveyor belt and shooting. He never sees what's going on. He never sees the stuff coming out. So if any human artifacts are found buried in coal, they're very unlikely to be found today, just because of the way coal is mined. But in the old days, lots of things were found in coal. Okay, next week we will try to finish up on the canopy, what it may have been like before the flood and what some of the effects were. You know, why did they live to be 900 years old? How do we find these giant animals, giant insects? And I've given you some of the evidence against the canopy theory, the complaints they have. We're going to give you some of the evidence for the canopy theory. One of those would be we find amber with increased oxygen. Something was different. We find evidence of animals like dinosaurs that have small lungs, small nostrils. They had to have greater air pressure and or greater oxygen concentration. Those are two of the lines of evidence that there must have been something different before the flood. The biggest line of evidence, I think, for the canopy theory is the Bible says there was water above the atmosphere.
What's the size of insects, the size of things?
We'll get into that next week, right? The insects are found that are gigantic, and they can't absorb oxygen today because of the surface area to volume ratio problem. We'll get into all that next week. Thank you so much. Dismissed. Well, thank you for joining us. This will be the last class of Creation Science 101. We've only covered about 1 1/2 of my videotape series, which is 15 hours long. We've covered what I normally cover in 3 hours. It's taken us almost 15 hours, or will by the end of this class, to get that far. So hopefully there's been some more information added that will be helpful and useful to you. We left off last week talking about the canopy of water that's above the, or that was above the earth. The Bible teaches in Genesis 1, 6, and 7 that there was a layer of water above the atmosphere. This is called the canopy theory. We've been talking about that the last few hours in here, about the time before the flood when something was different. Probably only a small fraction of the flood water was found in the canopy. Probably most of it was found underneath the crust of the earth. Maybe only 6 or 10 inches of ice or water would be above the atmosphere. It wouldn't take much more than that to filter out UV light, for instance. These glasses have a UV filter on them, and you can't even see it. I mean, it's so thin. It doesn't take much to stop UV light. And so I don't know how thick the canopy was. It's just a theory. But we do know that water will block out certain things. For instance, the sun produces lots of things besides light. It produces gamma rays, X-rays, beta rays. All those ray boys come down here, and they're pretty hard on your carcass. They will actually destroy your body. It causes a lot of damage. A canopy of water above the atmosphere would prevent that in the pre-flood world. And that things from the sun that are coming down, particularly X-rays, are very dangerous. They go right through your skin. You go to the hospital to get an X-ray. Of course, they use a higher dose of X-ray than you get from the sun. But you could take X-ray film that they use at the hospital, walk out in the yard, take it out of the box, put it back in, go inside and develop it. The sunlight produces X-rays. It'll ruin the film if they don't keep it protected. X-rays go right through your body, and they will expose what's inside. X-ray machines, basically they're sending out a blast of zillions of itty-bitty tiny bullets, real small. They go right through you and make a shadow of what's inside. Sort of like a machine gun or a shotgun, blasting you full of holes. And I tell people this is why many radiologists have a negative outlook on life, because they look at this kind of stuff all day long. But your skin especially suffers from this, X-rays from the sun. Your skin gets blasted all day long, and you have 3 basic layers to the skin, the dermis, epidermis, and subcutaneous, where the fat is stored. X-rays go blasting through your skin and blow it full of holes, and your body must fix the damage. And it happens, you know, all day. Millions of cells have to be replaced because of damage from the sun. And the more exposure to the sun you get, the more damage you cause to your skin. And after 50 or 60 or 70 years, your skin begins to lose the war. It can't keep up with the damage, and pretty soon everybody starts to notice you are losing the war. As your skin begins to wrinkle up, this is one of the primary causes of aging and wrinkling, is this damage from the sun. There's other causes involved, like the damage that's now happening to the plants that we're eating. Not only are we being exposed to sunlight since the flood's been over, being exposed to a different kind of sunlight, our plants are being exposed to a different kind of sunlight, so they're also not having the nutritional value that they used to have. Anyway, concrete will stop X-rays, lead stops X-rays, and water stops X-rays. Several other things stop them. And if there was a layer of water above the earth before the flood, that would explain why people lived so long. Before the flood, they lived an average of 912 years. That's a long time. It's also one of the quiz questions. What was the average, it'll actually end up on the final exam. What was the average lifespan before the flood? These are just, of course, from the dates we have recorded in the Bible. We don't know that this is average of everybody in the world at the time. But the patriarchs, all the people's names given in the Bible, if you simply add them up, the numbers that they give, and they left out Enoch in this average purposely. Enoch never died. So if you want to figure him in there, he's already 6,000 years old. So it would really up the average, not bring it down, since Enoch never died. So they left him out to average the rest of the numbers. It's interesting, when you look at the charts, the things you can learn from this graph are fascinating. For instance, Methuselah died the same year that the flood started. There's all sorts of good preaching goes on about this topic. I don't know how much of it is provable, but it's very interesting. Enoch was Methuselah's daddy. Apparently, God told these people what to name their children, because the names of these 10 patriarchs here have a message that it spells out. I forget what the message is now, but it's in Henry Morris's book. It's in the Defender's Bible, as a matter of fact. I should have looked that up before class. But you can get it. The 10 names have meanings. Methuselah means, when he dies, it shall come. Now picture yourself as Enoch. You have a baby boy named, and you don't know what to name him yet. And you and your wife are discussing, what do we name this kid? And the Lord impresses on your heart to name him Methuselah. When he dies, it shall come. So Enoch is holding his baby thinking, Lord, why do you want him named Methuselah? When he dies, what shall come? The end of the world? And so the preaching goes, I don't know how true it is, but it sure seems like it could be, that Enoch realized when this boy dies, that's it. God's going to destroy the world. Now, did Enoch know how long his baby was going to live? No. Could have lived, 2 days. So Enoch apparently got right with God and kept so close to the Lord because he didn't know when his son was going to die. All he knew was when this boy dies, that's it. Because God apparently had told him that in order to get this name, Methuselah. So Enoch got so close to the Lord, they're walking and talking one day, and the Lord said, Enoch, we're really closer to my house than yours. I want you to come on home and spend the rest of the day. He said, okay, Lord. And since there's no night there, he's still spending the day up in heaven with the Lord. Like I said, it preaches good, but we don't know. It's interesting, it shows God's mercy. Which one of the guys listed in the Bible lived the longest? Methuselah. God is long-suffering. He's not willing that any should perish. He gave them plenty of opportunity. So this really shows the mercy of God and his long-suffering. He wanted everybody saved. He kept giving them more and more chances. Methuselah lived the longest of all of them. And finally God had to bring judgment. And I think America's in that situation. We're about to receive the judgment of God. We sure deserve it, if anybody did. Now there are some people who go around teaching that the reason these numbers are so large before the flood. I just read an article in a book yesterday. This guy said, well, they used a lunar calendar. And the next sentence said, they counted every month as a year. So the guy was explaining why they lived to be 900 years old. He said they didn't really live to be 900. You have to divide their age by 12. Well, there are some real problems with that because Enoch was 65 when he begat Methuselah. Two of these guys were 65 when their son was born. And see, divided by 12, he's 5.5 when he becomes a daddy. I don't think so, okay? That would be an even bigger miracle than having him live to be 900. So it just simply is crazy to say that this is anything other than really living to be 900 years old. They really were. Probably the reason they were, several reasons. Number one, they would have a pure gene pool. No defective chromosomes. Today, the average person has about 4,000 defective genes. A gene, in case you don't know, is if you took a ladder, an extension ladder from here to Chicago, about 900 miles, and you had somebody stand on the other end while you started twisting it here. You twisted and twisted and twisted and twisted. By the time it gets all twisted up from here to Chicago, what are those things they sell at Taco Bell, the cinnamon twisters, okay? Sort of like that, all twisted up. That would be roughly what a chromosome looks like. Each cell in your body has 46 of those little chromosomes. The rung of the ladder would be a gene. So the illustration people use is a twisted ladder. Pretty tough to draw 2D, what a 3D ladder would look like twisted. But each of these things across here is a rung of the ladder. Each of those is called a gene. The whole thing is called a chromosome, or a DNA strand, deoxyribonucleic acid. The same thing as a chromosome, deoxyribonucleic acid. And this thing right across here is one gene, G-E-N-E. Now, when you get regenerated in Christ, you're being regened. Totally new person, new genes. That's where the word regenerate comes from that word gene. Now that'll preach too. But during conception for the baby, half of this chromosome comes from the mother and half comes from the father. The problem is it splits down the middle. Now let's take a ladder that is twisted from here to Chicago. We're going to split it all the way down the middle. It's going to unwind itself, and it's going to get the other half of the ladder from the mother or father, depending what your case may be, and it's going to wind itself back together, and all those genes are going to line up. Absolutely phenomenal how this can happen. And that's one chromosome. You got 46 that are doing this. 46 chromosomes in every cell of your body. So radiation from the sun is one of the things that causes damage to these genes. You often see people at the hospital when they're going to get an x-ray, they will put a lead apron over where the ovaries are on a woman, for instance, because they know the x-ray could damage the chromosomes, could damage the genes for the next generation. Many things can damage this, and so they try to be very sensitive to not create damage to this. But one of the reasons they lived to be 900 before the flood was they had a pure gene pool. No genetic load. You've got about 4,000 of these genes in your gene code that are defective. Sort of like a computer program where something's wrong. Now, if you marry closer than a first cousin, there's a high probability that you both have a similar gene code, and so you might both have the same defective genes. Now you're asking for trouble as far as deformed children. It's against the law in all but 3 states to marry closer than a first cousin. You have to marry second cousin or more farther away in all but 3 states in America. I won't tell you which the 3 states are, but drive through them and you'll be able to tell. The people, I believe that the product of that is called a redneck. But anyway, the people were living long before the flood. They had no defective chromosomes in the original creation, number one. Number two, they had a canopy of water to protect them, to filter out the radiation from the sun. Number three, they're eating a perfect diet. They're also eating food that has been unaffected by any of this harmful stuff. Plus, they're eating food grown in soil that is not depleted at all. Mineral-rich soil. I cannot believe what's happened to me in the last 3 weeks since I started drinking the mineral water. I've been taking vitamins for years, okay? Good vitamins, Shaklee vitamins. And I still have had trouble. I felt like I was getting arthritis in my left hip and my left knee. I've just been having trouble. And it just hurts, you know, when I move it sometime. And a chiropractor friend of mine said, "Are you taking minerals?" I said, "Well, I guess not. I take all sorts of vitamins." He said, "Oh, well, your body can't absorb vitamins very well unless you also have these minerals." And so I started drinking this couple ounces of this mineral stuff. To describe it as tasting like weak tea would be an exaggeration. It doesn't taste real good. Not real bad, but it's just, you know, it's all right. Anyway, I drink it every day. And all I can say is I feel so much better. It is really helping. And I'm not selling the stuff. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just saying it works. I think in the original creation, they had perfect food supply, perfect atmosphere to breathe, no genetic load. They had probably several reasons why they were living to be 900 years old. And they really were. Plus, they were probably getting bigger. The largest man, or tallest man in this century, that we know of anyway, was Robert Wadlow, who died in 1940. He was 5'6" when he was 5 years old. When he was 12, he was the world's tallest Boy Scout at 7'4". He finally, when he was 22 years of age, started getting trouble with his knees from his growing so fast. He grew to be 8'11½", almost 9 feet tall. And he had trouble with his knees, and so they made special leg braces for him. And one of the braces rubbed a sore on his ankle, and he got gangrene in the sore and died at age 22. He had a size 37 shoe. There's a life-size statue of him in Alton, Illinois, where he lived, just by St. Louis. There's me standing next to it. Now, I can stand flat-footed and touch an 8-foot ceiling. I could not touch his chin. There's Robert next to his brother and his dad. He was a big boy. He weighed 500 pounds. He doesn't look very fat, does he? He's a big fellow. I think before the flood, they were bigger than that. Now, this is a drawing, not a picture, of a skeleton that was alleged to be found in a coal mine in Italy back in the 1850s, I believe. Now, some of the scoffers have ridiculed this drawing, saying when you find a skeleton, the ribs are not in place. Well, I understand that, okay? The ribs are going to collapse and it's going to be flattened out. They're not going to be up in place like that. This is just a drawing of what they said they found in this coal mine. There are numerous stories and legends about giant skeletons that have been found. And this man was supposed to be 11 feet 6 inches tall. Well, long, not tall. He's laying down now. But 11'6". Can you imagine having one of those guys on your basketball team? Hey, throw the ball to Herman. Okay, drop it in, Herman. Right there. You could stand on the free throw line and probably drop it in the hoop. They could shoot 100% from the free throw line. In my seminar, I tell the story how some people get upset with me and they say, now, Mr. Hovind, you said that was the skeleton of a man. Maybe it was a woman. Well, that's a fair question, but I taught biology and anatomy. I happen to know how to tell the difference between a male and female skeleton. It is not the number of ribs. Only Adam was missing a rib. By the way, there's only one bone in the human body that will grow back if it's removed. The bottom rib. The only bone that'll regenerate. There's an interesting story in Creation magazine just a few months ago. If you get from Answers in Genesis, Creation magazine, about this a doctor who was in a car accident and had smashed his face in, and they were going to rebuild the bones in his face. He went in for surgery many, many times, and they kept opening up his side, taking pieces of bone out to use it to graft to rebuild his facial bones. And so this doctor asked his doctor, aren't I going to run out of bone down there or something? You keep going in the same spot to get bone for grafting in my face. He said, no, you know, the only bone that grows back in the whole human body is the lowest rib. Interesting bit of trivia. As long as you leave the coating, called the periosteum, the rib will grow right back. So, Adam had a rib taken out. That, of course, is not going to affect his gene pool. If you cut your arm off and you have children, will your children be born with no arm? No. And if God took a rib out of Adam, that wouldn't affect his children any. And it's surprising how many people today still believe women have more ribs than men. It just simply is not true, okay? Now, it is true there are people who have one extra set of ribs more than everybody else. See, that happens. It's a genetic thing. You know, sometimes people have 13 ribs, pairs, instead of 12. But it's pretty rare, and who cares anyway. But it's not a male-female thing, okay? Everybody has the same number of ribs. But there are two ways to tell the difference between a male and female skeleton. One is to look at the feet. If they're pointed toward the mall, it's a woman. Don't write that down. That won't be a quiz question. One lady said, no, Mr. Hovind, her feet are pointed away from the mall because she died after shopping. That shopping's hard on these women. I said, okay. The second way to tell the difference is to look at the process on what's called the temporal mandibular joint. That's the place where the jawbone, the mandible, hooks onto the skull. If that joint right there is worn out more, it's probably a woman. One lady said, that's because we got to tell you men everything twice. You don't listen the first time. I said, well, I'm guilty of that too. But that's just a joke I tell. And you'd be surprised. I get letters from time to time, or phone calls, people get upset about jokes in my seminar. I say, look, lighten up, you know. First place, I'm just kidding. They say, are you against women? I say, my own mother was a woman. No, I'm not against women. She comes from a long line of women, matter of fact. So, no, I'm not against them at all. But there are other differences between male and female skeletons. These two are not the ones. But some giant skeletons have been found. That's what I want to talk about tonight. In Indianapolis newspaper in 1975, they quoted an article that was also quoted in Reader's Digest, Mysteries of the Unexplained, where it talks about a giant skeleton 9 foot, 8 inch tall. That's pretty big. It was found in Indiana in 1879. And I don't know what became of it. Nobody's been able to trace down what happened to this giant skeleton. I have a theory about that, though, and we will get to that in a minute. A skeleton nearly 10 feet long was found in Humboldt Lake, Nevada in 1931. 10-foot skeleton up to the ceiling up there. Pretty good size. In Guam, there are some giant stones that are set up over there. And even today, the legend exists in Guam about the Leyte stones. I think that's how you pronounce it, Leyte, that are found. They said, who put these giant stones up here anyway? They said, oh, the giants that used to live here did that. It's still part of their custom that there were giants in Guam at one time. Giant people. In Walkertown, Indiana, which is up near South Bend, a group of amateur archaeologists opened a mound in 1925 and unearthed the skeletons of 8 giants ranging from 8 to 9 feet long, all wearing heavy copper armor. Through the bungling of the diggers and the disinterest of the Archaeological Museum establishment, these discoveries have now been scattered and lost. Now, the book Weird America by Jim Brandon, which I have in my library here, he goes through talking about some of these giant things that are found and about dinosaurs still living. And then he says, isn't it amazing they survive for millions of years? Just does good research and gets the wrong conclusion from the whole thing. Lompoc, California, down in Southern California. I'll be there day after tomorrow. In 1883, some soldiers were digging for a magazine, a place to store gunpowder, keep it cool out of the weather. They found a giant skeleton 12 feet tall. The Indians in that area, this was still during the time of a lot of Indians, you know, Indian wars even going on in 1880, they got upset because they had disturbed a grave. Now, in many cultures, of course, if you disturb a grave, that's one of the worst taboos there is. You don't bother a grave. And so the remains were reburied, and nobody knows where it is today. But this was reported commonly back in 1880s about this giant skeleton. This is from the book The Unexplained by Dr. Carl Schuker, who is a scientist in England and writes extensively about unusual phenomena like this. You might also want to contact Todd Jurasik. He's a friend of mine in Oklahoma who does a lot of research on giant skeletons that are found. He's writing a book about it. I've been after him. I say, Todd, he calls once a month or so. I say, finish the book, because he's collected an enormous amount of material on these giant skeletons, giant humans that are found. A skeleton 12 feet tall was reported in Tucson, Arizona in 1891. The man had 6 toes, long hair, and a bird-shaped headdress. Where else do you read about 6 toes in the Bible? Who knows? Who had six fingers and 6 toes? Anybody know? Goliath's brother, or cousin or uncle or whatever he was, had 6 toes and 6 fingers. Often, though not always, 6 toes is one of the first, 6 toes or 6 fingers is one of the first symptoms of close inbreeding. First cousin marriage, you know, man marries his aunt or his niece. Not always, but often this is the case. The girl that I told you about that rode our bus in Illinois had sickle cell anemia. Her mother and father were brother and sister. The 9-year-old raped his 8-year-old sister, and she got pregnant and had a child, and that little child rode our bus. Great, great girl. She died at 13 of sickle cell anemia, but she had 6 fingers on each hand. This is not always the case, but it is one of the symptoms that sometimes shows up with extra digits. This happens with cats all the time. Cats often marry back to their own family. How many have ever seen a cat with 6 or 7 toes? Ever seen that? I saw one with 9 at one time. Cats had toes sticking out every place. Cat was, well, cats are schizo anyway, but this one was extra schizo. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with that cat. That is a redneck cat. But I've got several books in my library if you want to read more about this, these giants that are found. Here's the references at the bottom. There's a whole series of books by David Hatcher Childress. You might want to write that phone number down and get a hold of them. That's the one where this article comes from. If you want to we'll get into this in a second. But 815, this is south of Chicago, Kankakee area, 815-253-9000. And they do research on, it's called World Explorer Magazine. Now, they're not Christians necessarily, but they just do incredible research on strange things that are found around the world that nobody wants to talk about because they don't fit what's called the paradigm, you know, the way you're supposed to believe. But they go and visit these places and do research on it. It's really, really good stuff. They've got a book called Far Out Adventures. I'll bring that after the break. I've got it here. Heidi, once you cut the pages out, I handed it to somebody to bring out here tonight, and it didn't make it. So it must be still on my desk. But that's put out by these folks about some of these giant skeletons and other strange things. They get into all sorts of things, UFOs and, you know, a variety of things like that. There's a website which you can get about this topic, geocities.com, which is a web host for all sorts of things. But geocities.com/thetropics/lagoon/1345/giants has information about some of the giant skeletons. This article we passed out here from Far Out Adventures magazine is one of the back issues about what the Smithsonian has done for hiding information about these giants. When a giant skeleton is found, the Smithsonian often will come to investigate, and they'll say, oh, this is interesting, we'll take this back and study it. And they take it back and you never hear from it again. It's reported in here, I got several things in here, that an entire barge full of artifacts was taken out in the ocean and dumped from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, some of the directors seem to have an agenda. They want to make sure everybody believes in evolution. Now, I think there's a bigger picture. If we can step back and look at the whole thing. Satan wants to control this world. The Bible teaches God made the world. Now, if you get a bunch of people together who believe God made the world, they believe they have rights that came from God. Those people don't make good slaves. Eventually, they will throw the tea in the harbor and rebel against the king, right? Like our founding fathers did, because they had a philosophy. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And people who believe in creation oftentimes get this attitude of, you know, I'm going to answer to God, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm going to try to please God. Now, if somebody wants a one-world government or a new world order, they can't have people believing they have rights that come from God. You have to get everybody to believe that your rights come from the government. And so evolution is a foundation philosophy for communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism. If you want people to believe government is supreme, evolution goes along with that attitude. But if you want people to believe that God is supreme and laws come from God, then creation is the foundation for that thinking. And I believe there are many folks in this country in high places with lots of money who really want a one-world government. They have most of the money. They would like the rest of it. And so they want everybody to be their slaves. And they want to be the elite, and we will be the rice farmers, those that they allow to live, you know, however many that's going to be, whatever they need, you know. And so there's a real strong push among some of these institutions like Smithsonian, and probably everybody that works there doesn't know this and maybe doesn't care. But there are certainly some who would say, look, we want people to believe in evolution theory. This is the world view we're going to push. And anything that goes against this theory, we'll just have to, you know, get rid of that information. Now, evolution teaches man started off itty-bitty, and we're evolving and getting bigger and better and stronger. Isn't that what the theory teaches? If you find a 12-foot skeleton, what does that do to your theory? It shoots it down. Suppose the opposite of evolution is true. Suppose we were made in God's image. Let's just suppose now, okay? Suppose Adam and everybody back here was 12 feet tall. If you're 12 feet tall, how fast could you run? In a perfect environment, 30% oxygen, perfect food supply. You don't need a car. You run to Grandma's house, right? Of course, they didn't have a grandma either, but it was just, or a mother-in-law either. That's why it was paradise. But no, actually, my wife has a great mother-in-law. But I think the time before the flood was just a lot different. They probably were huge back then. And you can take this home and read it. For those of you watching the tapes, of course, I'm not going to make a copy for you. You have to get your own book from the World Explorer magazine. Keeping in mind, it's not a Christian organization. It's just fascinating research on giant things or unusual things that kind of just disappear when they get in the Smithsonian, you know, the attic of the nation, it's called, and they disappear for sure. Right now, in Lovelock, Nevada, in Lovelock Cave, in 1931, or 1911, I'm sorry, they found this giant human skull. The person that had this skull would have probably been 10 feet tall, assuming normal body proportions. The skull is still there on display in Winnemucca, Nevada. If you're ever driving across Nevada, stop in, because there's nothing else to see when you drive across Nevada. You might as well stop in Winnemucca if you get close. But there's this massive human skull. Your second bone down in your thumb, all these bones are called phalanges in your fingers and thumb. The second one down is shown right here on this picture. On top is a normal size human phalange, thumb bone. Underneath, Ron Wyatt, a friend of mine who died about a year ago, he is holding a giant human thumb bone. This giant human thumb bone was part of an entire skeleton, obviously. This was found right near Mount Ararat. Now, Ron told me the whole story before he died. You can call Richard Reeves, see phone number right there. Richard took over for Ron when he died. Richard's number is 931-486-0557, and listen to the story. But Ron said that they were exploring around the area where Noah's Ark is in Turkey. He's been over there bunches of times doing research over there about Noah's Ark. And they found this large stone. It was very, very faded, but they could make out an image on there. He said there were two stones, apparently gravestones. One of the stones had what looked like a boat carved in there with a bow over the top of it, apparently symbolizing the rainbow over Noah's Ark. Walking away from the boat, there were 2 big people and 6 small people. One of the big people had their eyes closed. So they assume this is symbolism for this is the grave of one of the big people on Noah's Ark. The other tombstone had both of the big people's eyes closed. So they're assuming, hey, this is Noah's grave, this is Mrs. Noah's grave. Now in that culture, Islamic, you don't disturb a grave. But they did. They dug it up. The coffin was over 12 feet long. The skeleton inside was 12 feet tall, assuming it was Mrs. Noah. Inside were all sorts of jewels. Apparently, pre-flood jewels. This seems reasonable anyway. The mayor of the city over there that was with on this expedition, they covered the grave back up and didn't disturb anything. When Ron went back several years later, the gravestone had been smashed, and the coffin was gone, and the jewels were all gone. And so all they can surmise is that somebody in the government over there, decided to go become rich. Ron dug around in the dirt and did find a few more of the bones that apparently when they moved the skeleton, some of the bones, fell apart. Here's one of the thumb bones right there. This person would have been probably 12 feet tall. People say, you think 1 man and 3 boys built that big boat for the flood? Oh yeah, the Bible says they did. Of course, they could have hired help too. People work for heathens and heathen work for saved people all the time, and vice versa. But some people say, well, 1 man and 3 boys couldn't build a boat that big. Well, you didn't see those boys. They would have been big too, right? Now let's assume Noah was 12 feet tall. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument. Now what would that do to his cubit? How big would his cubit be? Now we don't know the size of the ark. It could be when Moses edited the book of Genesis, Moses would translate it, if that's the right word, into what he thought was the modern English or modern unit of measurement. For instance, if I was going to translate an ancient document from 2,000 years ago and they're talking about shekels, it would make sense for me to write it in English as dollars and cents, right? So it could be that Moses edited Genesis and he might have used what's called the Egyptian cubit, which was 20.6 inches. My cubit happens to be very close to that, 21 inches. 20.6 inches is an Egyptian cubit. The standard Hebrew cubit seems to be 18 inches. Everybody's cubit is slightly different, but that's, who cares? Anyway, the ark might have been really big. This thigh bone, let's see. Don, would you grab that off the table over there? I'm wired in here. This is a replica of a thigh bone that was given to me. Joe Taylor, his phone number there, he makes the castings of this thing. That's good, just bring it up right there, yeah. And if you see over there in the corner is the drawing of what the guy would have looked like. This is the thigh bone, it's upside down here, from a giant skeleton that was found when a road construction crew was digging with bulldozers across part of Egypt. They think they went across an ancient battlefield. They don't know. There's all kinds of skeletons out there. This guy would have been about 13 feet tall, if proportions hold true. I can't vouch for what happened to the originals. That's good, Jan, thank you. But that's a good sized thigh bone. Here's Joe Taylor, the guy who makes the castings of it, standing next to it, telling about it. Egyptian construction crew ran into a burial ground and found several burials of giant humans, some 16 feet tall. I was asked to sculpt a model based on one femur. The size femur would have belonged to a man 16 feet tall. The Bible tells of giants before and after the flood. Goliath was 9 foot. Actually, Goliath the Bible says he was 6 cubits and a span. Well, a cubit is at least 1.5 feet. That's the small cubit. 6 of those is 9 feet, and a span is 9 inches. So if Goliath was 9 foot and 9, then the Bible says Og, King Og, was somewhere between 12 and 18 feet tall, because the Bible says Og's bed was, I forget how many cubits it gives, but you can look up Og in the Bible. Either he just liked having a big bed, or he was really a big fella. But he would have been pretty big, and this was after the flood. Giant skeletons have been found in Texas, Arizona, Europe, Ohio, and in the Bible lands. There are giant bones in rock supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. That's the problem, is that stupid evolution theory that hinders people from doing research. Here's a kid standing next to the replica of the thigh bone here that was found in Egypt. In Turkey, giant skeletons giant jawbones are on display right now. Ron said they wouldn't let him open the case to take the jawbones out and look at them, because they don't want people handling these things. This may be from Noah's grave, or Mrs. Noah's grave, we don't know. But across what's called the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint, where your jaw attaches, average human is probably about 3.5 inches. That's the width of your jawbone across the joints. This was 6.5 inches. Any one of us could put your head inside the jaw and rattle it back and forth. This would be a giant person. We would assume, or else they had a huge jawbone, one or the other. Up in Wasaukie, Wisconsin, I went up there and met Mrs. Ailes. She owns the resort where some giant bones were found. This is in Wisconsin. We'll talk about that right after the break when we get back. Talk about some more of the giants that are found. Let's take a few-minute break here. Let's finish up talking about some of the giants that are found from apparently pre-flood times and probably shortly after the flood. I was up in Wisconsin. I heard about this article in the newspaper back in 1904 of a giant, several giant skeletons that were found inside an Indian burial mound. So I was driving right past Wasaukie, Wisconsin one day last year, and so I decided to stop and see, chase it down, see what I could do. It's been 1904, it's been nearly 100 years. But I found the place where these Indian mounds were. They're now underwater. You can just see the tops of them sticking out above the water. They built a dam and filled this valley in with Fritz Lake. The person that owns the property where this was Mrs. Ailes. Now she is 94 years old. So she was born just a couple years after this was found by her father, I believe is the one who found these giant skeletons. Here's what the newspaper article says. Near the outlet of Lake Nockabee, which is where Mrs. Ailes' resort is now, in northeast Wisconsin, mounds were found containing hundreds of skeletons. One skull was about 3 times the size of the ordinary human, and other bones were correspondingly big. Now this is an article from 1904. So I stopped, found Mrs. Ailes. She's 94 years old, still runs her own resort there. People rent cabins, to come go fishing on the lake. I said, Mrs. Ailes, what's the story about these giant bones found on your property? She said, oh, come with me, I'll show you. We went out in the front yard, the lakeside. She said, you see that little island right there? I said, yep. She said, that's the top of an Indian mound, apparently Indian. It's the top of a mound anyway. That's where the bones were found. I said, what happened to them? She said, my dad gave it to a doctor, gave the giant skull to a doctor, and his widow is still alive. She's 104 or 5 years old. She's in a nursing home. Apparently the dad kept this giant skull for a while because she said she had seen it, this giant human skull. And then I don't know how many years later it was, he gave it to this doctor. And she said, I don't know what his widow's done with it. She's in the nursing home. I'll ask her next time I see her. 104 years old. I haven't heard back. That's the last I heard. But there's Mrs. Ailes' phone number. You can call it up and check it out for yourself. But this was a story reported from here up in Wisconsin about giant human skeletons were found. The Bible says there were giants in the earth in those days. Now, what factors would cause them to grow to be 10 or 12 or 14 feet tall, I don't know. But I know a lot of the footprints that are found in rock, the human footprints like the ones in Glen Rose, Texas, that are found with dinosaur tracks, the footprints are huge, 16 inches long. Some of them 24 inches long. Shaquille O'Neal is a pretty good-sized basketball player. His shoe is a size 22, so it'd be, I don't know, about yay long. Mine is a size 10.5. I'm 6'1", size 10.5 shoe. Shaquille is a size 22. I've met people that have size 18 shoes. I'll show you some pictures of those in the next class when we get to that point about the giant human skeletons. We'll get a little more into the giant insects and giant animals that are found. But the time before the flood is probably the time when these giants lived. The Bible teaches us that we are made in God's image. It's pretty clear. Genesis chapter 1, God said, I'm going to make man in my image. Now, there's all sorts of arguments about what does this mean. Does this mean God has a body like we do? No, that's not what that means. The Bible teaches very clearly that God is a spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. John chapter 4. So this is probably a moral likeness. We have a consciousness of right and wrong. There's I was on a radio, 2 radio programs this afternoon just before class, and one of the things that comes up is, if evolution is true, how do you determine right from wrong? Where's the standard? If we were going to build this room, and I got all you guys and said, okay, I want you to help me build this room, and I gave everybody a ruler, but all of them were different standards. On yours, this is an inch. On yours, this is an inch. On yours, this is an inch. On yours, we have a regular inch. If everybody had a different standard of what an inch was, or a meter, if we all had different standards, how would this room turn out if we're all working together to try to build it? Not too good, would it? Wouldn't be good at all. You have to have a standard, even if it's wrong, just so you all have the same standard, just something to go by. And the problem is, America has lost the standard for determining right from wrong. How do you tell right from wrong? Think about it. If evolution is true, how do you tell what's wrong and right? We used to have a standard we went by called "Thus saith the Lord." But we've lost that. We've left that. We haven't lost it. We left it. The standard for determining right from wrong. People say, do you think abortion's right or wrong? I say, well, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in creation or evolution? Because that's going to determine how you make your other decisions. Is murder right or wrong? Well, do you believe in creation or evolution? Because that's really where it's going to start. If you believe in evolution, I'd like to know how do you determine right from wrong? If evolution is true, why do people have a conscience? Why do we have love and justice and mercy? And would those emotions evolve? Does a lion feel bad when he kills the zebra and eats him? No. He's glad. He's going to do it again, right? Plans to. Why doesn't the animal world develop these feelings of pity and emotions like that? If evolution is true, I mean, if evolution is really true, then no humans should be alive today that have feelings of love and justice and mercy and pity. They shouldn't have survived. That should have been weeded out a long time ago. So this verse about being made in the image of God, I think is talking about a moral likeness. There's whole sermons, there's whole books just on this, what does this verse mean about the image of God. But here, the Bible teaches we're made in God's image, and the textbooks teach the kids, this is Grandpa. Right? How many of you learned about cavemen when you were in school, about us coming from an ape-like creature of some kind? So what about these cavemen? The kids are taught this in school. They're taught we came from an ape-like ancestor. Is it possible for an ape to turn to a human? Somebody sent me that email and I just couldn't resist throwing that in there. Let's talk just briefly about the caveman. There's so much more that needs to go into this topic. I mean, their whole course is going to be taught just on this. We'll take a little quick trip down Evolution's Hall of Shame. Nebraska man is a good place to start. You know, all they really found for a Nebraska man was one tooth. A guy named Harold Cook in Sioux County, Nebraska, which borders Colorado, he found a tooth. That was it. One tooth. He said it looked to him like it was halfway between the shape of a human tooth and an ape's tooth. So therefore, it proves it came from an animal that was halfway between a human and an ape. This is the line of logic they use now, okay? They built the entire skeleton for the museum around this one tooth. They said, well, if the tooth is shaped like this, the jaw must be shaped like this. And if the jaw's like that, that would fit a head like this. And if the head like that, then it'd fit the body. They built the entire thing from one tooth. Then they made the guy a wife. You got to really be good to know what his wife looks like from the shape of his tooth. But they had him on display. London Illustrated London News, 1922. Nebraska man, proof for evolution. During the Scopes monkey trial in 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, they were going to bring in a bunch of witnesses to give proof for evolution. It turned out the judge said, it doesn't matter what evidence you have for evolution, this is not what's on trial. The only question is, did the teacher break the law? The law in Tennessee says you can't teach evolution. So I don't want you bringing in evidence for evolution. That doesn't matter whether there's evidence for it. The question is, did he break the law? That was the question. So even though these evolutionists had these grandiose plans of making a big deal out of using this case to bring all their evidence for evolution in, the judge disallowed anything. He said, I don't care about the evidence for evolution. It doesn't matter, because that's not what's on trial here. But one of the things they were working very hard and preparing to bring in as evidence was Nebraska Man. The American Museum of Natural History in New York, the director at the time was Henry Fairfield Osborn, who was a racist through and through. And we'll get in a lot more of his quotes later when we get into seminar part 5, if we ever get that far. But the racism that evolution breeds. Osborn was one of the guys who went around promoting this as proof for evolution. Nebraska Man is proof for evolution. Here we have the proof right in your hands. How can you not believe it? It was a tooth. Later they found out the tooth really came from a peccary, a pig. There's the real Nebraska Man right there, folks. It was a pig's tooth. I had an evolutionist get all upset with me and said, don't you know there's a difference between a peccary and a pig? Well, look at them both side by side. Okay, the peccary's still alive in South America, running around doing just fine. Okay, I know there's a minor difference, but they're a very similar animal. Okay, let's look at Piltdown Man. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Dawson and a French Catholic priest who loved the evolution theory named Pierre de Chardin, he had a longer name than that. And all those French always have 8 names, you know, but he had a real long name. Anyway, and a guy named Woodward, and nobody's for sure who's involved in this, but who made this happen. But they were looking for evidence for evolution. Now, if you get somebody who's determined he wants to find evidence for his theory, he's eventually going to find some evidence for his theory, even if he has to interpret what he finds in the light of his theory, which is probably what everybody does. We're all guilty of that, okay? Which is why you have to have other people check your work and say, hey, here's where you're wrong. Sorry about that. Well, this Catholic priest, Pierre de Chardin, and these other guys were digging around in this gravel pit looking for the missing link. Now keep in mind, in the early 1900s, evolution theory had been out for 60 years. Darwin had predicted, we're going to find evidence for my theory. It had been 60 years since Darwin's theory came out, and there was still no evidence. So they started getting pretty desperate. And so people were looking for proof for this theory. And so probably Woodward or the Catholic priest Pierre de Chardin took a human skull, just the skull cap, the top part of the skull, and the jawbone from an orangutan, an ape. They broke off the places where they would normally fit together, where the hinges go together. They broke those off because they'd be real obvious they didn't go together if those pieces were on there. So they broke off the important pieces. They stained them with, first they treated them with acid to make them look old and pitted, stained them with some kind of chemical to make them look old, and went out and buried them in the gravel pit, close to each other. They went out fossil hunting a few days later, and guess what they found? Oh, look at this. Wow, proof for evolution. They planted it themselves, apparently. This came to be known as the Piltdown Man because it was from Piltdown, which is near England. Or it's in England. It's near London, England. The Piltdown Commons, I believe. It was a gravel pit. Piltdown Man was in the textbooks for 40 years. All the kids for 40 years were taught, we've got proof for evolution from the Piltdown Man. If you'd went to school, if you had gone to school in the 1930s or 1940s or early 1950s, your textbook would have said, evolution is true, and here's the evidence for it. And Piltdown Man would have been one of the things you'd have to learn and study and memorize. 1953, it was exposed as a fraud. See, here's the problem. When they get these cavemen, somebody will find the bones, they will reassemble it what they think it looked like, because the bones are usually pretty broken up. I believe, for instance, Lucy, the skull of Lucy had 200 pieces. Talk about a jigsaw puzzle. First place, you're not even sure you have all the pieces. Try to put together a puzzle like that. But they put together the Piltdown hoax. It was a deliberate fraud. Broke off the important pieces so they wouldn't discover the fraud. Then they made castings of those pieces, make a replica. Now the replicas go out to museums all over the world. The real bones are kept locked in a vault where nobody can even look at them. Probably none of you in this room have ever met anybody who has seen the original bones. They lock them up like they're more important than gold in Fort Knox. Of course, there's no gold in Fort Knox anymore either. That's another long story. But the replicas went all over the place. Replicas of Piltdown Man. Everybody studied these replicas and said, wow, you're right, There were 500 papers. I used to say there were 500 doctoral dissertations. That's not quite correct. There were 500 research papers, some just for master's degrees or other papers, that were written about the Piltdown fossils. People studied the replicas and said, yep, this goes together, this is proof for evolution, and wrote a paper, and the paper gets published someplace, and therefore now they can say, look, there's 500 articles published about this, it has to be true. Well, somebody got the brilliant idea to go study the original fossils. Wow, what a novel idea. Looking at them under the microscope, they discovered the teeth had been filed down. There were file marks on the teeth. The more they studied the originals, the more they realized these don't even go together. Then in the early 50s, they developed another kind of test to test bones. I think it's fluoride something. Bones absorb fluoride out of the ground. I could look up the name of the test. But to see how old they were. They found out the skull cap was probably 800 years old. Maybe from a battle back, 800 years ago. England had battles all the time over there. Everybody beating each other with their swords and spears. And so they got this skull cap, probably about 800 years old, they guessed. And the jawbone was probably less than 100 years old. And it was from an orangutan. Now see, the shape of the skull of a human is more rounded as opposed to the monkey skull, which is a very distinctive shape. And if you find a big enough piece of a skull, a good anthropologist can tell you quickly if it's from a human or from an ape. So this was an obviously human skull cap and an obviously ape-like jaw. See, the human jaw is rounded, whereas ape's jaws is more pointed, kind of like St. Louis arch or a parabola. And so one of the things they go by for determining, this is the shape roughly of a human lower jaw. Your teeth will line up, in this configuration, whereas an ape's is more elongated, like that. And this was obviously an ape-like jaw, but obviously human skull. And so they said, wow, this is evolution. And this is where they got the idea that probably the brain evolved into human first before speech evolved. Oh, this is proof, all right. What more could you ask for? They're so desperate to make that theory true because that's the only way to get rid of God. Well, it turned out to be a fraud. This article here from Reader's Digest 1956 explained more about this Piltdown hoax, if you want to get that article. I went to quite a few libraries looking for this article. I found many libraries that have Reader's Digest that go all the way back, long ways. I forget how many exactly, but quite a few of the libraries I went to, when I got the October 56 Reader's Digest issue down, opened it up, those pages had been cut out. They were gone. Interesting. Now, I don't know if it's a conspiracy or what, but they were gone, I can tell you that. Finally, somebody sent me an original 1956 Reader's Digest, which I have in my library here. It's the article about the Piltdown hoax. But I suspect, of course, if somebody wants evolution to be believed, then you don't want evidence against it out there. So there are probably some people who don't like this at all. Neanderthal man is one more that's in the textbooks. He's still in there today. Neanderthal, the name comes from the Neander Valley, named after some guy named, I believe it was Joseph Neander. There's a famous song that we have in our songbooks. I should have looked that up. Somebody can find that and write to me. I'll add it to my next time I teach this class. But Neander Valley was named after this Christian in Germany who loved the Lord and wrote a beautiful song that's in our songbooks today. If you look in your songbooks and you see the name Neander, Jacob or Johann Neander, maybe it was, I don't know, it's a German name, I believe. But this valley is named after him. In this valley, they found some bones of a human. The back was bent over. So they said, oh, look, his back's bent over. Now, of course, most people know that humans walk on 2 legs and apes walk on 4. Because of the way they walk, the way their skeleton is positioned normally, this makes a great difference in their backbones. The vertebrae in your back, for instance, in between every vertebrae, there's a cartilage pad, a disc, okay? Because your backbone is under pressure this way most of the time, each of the bones is dished out to keep that pad in the center. If an animal normally walks with what's called a horizontal backbone, like an elephant or a dog, their backbone is this direction. There you'll find the facets of the parts where their backbones come together is flat. I have, for instance, some mammoth vertebrae and some whale vertebrae. Now both of those would have a horizontal backbone, and the vertebrae are flat on the places where they come together because they're not under compression this way, they're under strain this way from the flexing. Who cares? Apes walk on 4 legs. This changes 2 things. This changes the configuration of their backbone. It also changes the place where the nerve from the backbone enters the head. If you're walking upright, your head is perpendicular to your backbone. So the hole going into your skull is in a different position than an ape or a dog or most any other animal that walks on 4 legs. The hole where the brain stem goes in is farther back, the position of this hole into the head. And so they can tell by the shape, by the position of the hole into the head, roughly how the person's head was attached. Now I've seen some people that their normal standing position is with their head way out here. Right? Not kyphosis, yeah, kyphosis, head drifted forward like that. So I'm sure even among people there's a great range of where the hole is going into your skull. But Neanderthal man was listed as a missing link because the back was curved over. Well, they found out about 50 years ago it's because he had arthritis. That's why his back is curved over. Wasn't a part human, part ape. He had arthritis. He was deformed by a disease of some kind, or rickets. But Neanderthal man is still in the textbooks today. Now there's an excellent book if you want to get into the study of the caveman, and I recommend you do that if you're going to be a testimony to other people. We sell this book through our ministry called Buried Alive by Jack Cawazzo. Jack Cawazzo is a dentist in, I believe, New Jersey. He lives up in New England area, or northeast someplace. He went to France and Germany and studied the original bones. Not many folks do that. Most people study the replicas of the bones. He studied all of them. His life was threatened many times because the stuff he was finding out was that these things that we're saying are evidence for evolution are just deformed humans. Humans deformed from disease. His entire book is just about the Neanderthals. It's not about all the other so-called cavemen, just the Neanderthals, and it's very fascinating reading about the things that happened to him as they did research on the Neanderthals. He said, for instance, he examined the famous Rhodesia man, or Broken Hill man, the Neanderthal skull. Dr. Cawazzo said, "You must understand this skull really cries out disease. The teeth are badly decayed. The bones of the vault of the skull are extremely thick. There are many features that testify of acromegaly, or excessive secretion of growth hormone in adulthood. As a person gets older, several things happen. Their ears start to get longer. Anybody notice that? On older people, their ears get longer, and their nose gets bigger. This is because the glands are continually producing this hormone that causes these things to happen. Acromegaly. Some people get it really, really bad. Excessive secretion of this hormone. The thickening of the bones in the forehead and the eyebrow ridge getting thicker is one of the symptoms of a person getting older. If a person passes 90 or 100 years of age, their bones get thicker in the head. They really do get thick-headed. Now, after the flood, how long were they living? 400 years, right? What happened to these people that died after the flood? They probably got buried, right? I mean, what did they do with Noah when he died? They buried him, right? Isn't that normal? So it could be that what they're finding, these skeletons with thicker bones in the head, could be people that are living to be 300 or 400 years old. Post-flood. See, the pre-flood people were probably buried and dissolved, destroyed, you know. Probably wouldn't find very many of those bones at all. Some people have asked, well, hey, if there's a worldwide flood, why don't we find more human bones? I think there's several reasons for that. We get into a lot more of that on video number 7, the question-answer video. But for one thing, when God made the world, it was full of plants, full of animals, and only 2 people. 1,600 years later, it's still full of plants and still full of animals and still not full of people. So there's probably a lot more animals to be drowned than there were people to be drowned. Secondly, let's suppose that the people before the flood were 12 feet tall, just for the sake of the argument. You're going out looking for bones, but you believe in evolution. Because of your belief in evolution, you believe everybody in the past was 3 feet tall, right? You've already got this preconceived idea that says man is evolving and getting bigger and better. So you're digging around in the dirt and you find part of a bone that is gigantic. It would never enter your mind that it might be part of a human bone because of your preconceived idea. You would assume it must be from a giant sloth or a cave bear or a dinosaur or something, okay? There's no telling how many bones have been misidentified because of the preconceived idea of evolution, as opposed to doing research from a creation perspective when things start to make a lot more sense. I'd recommend you get this if you want to get into the Neanderthal study at all. It's a fascinating book on the Neanderthals. They still list him today in the textbooks as one of the proofs for evolution, when it's just a normal human deformed by disease. The brains were actually bigger than ours. Now they can tell from the bone about how big the person's muscles are. The more you work out with your muscles, the more it puts pressure on the bones, and actually the bones grow larger. Bodybuilders not only get bigger muscles, they get bigger bones. Take a look. Now, but the pressure of the muscle pulling on the bone will cause it to enlarge at that point. The body sends a message to the brain, hey, this muscle's pulling pretty hard, I need some more bone down here. And so the bone sends a message down, or the brain sends a message down to grow more bone. And so by studying the size of Neanderthal bones, they've determined the brain was larger than ours, about 1,600 cc, cubic centimeter, average. And they were incredibly strong. It has been said the average Neanderthal could probably pick up the average NFL linebacker and throw him over the goalpost. Unbelievably strong. About 5'10", I believe, was the average height, somewhere in there for the Neanderthals. But just massively built, really strong people. Now their eyebrow ridge was different than ours. Of course, you could, if you could put a suit and tie on a Neanderthal and walk him down the street, nobody would look twice. He would look just like us. And all you got to do is drive around Pensacola, and you'll see some strange shaped skulls on people, right? You could line up the folks in this room and probably prove something, right? If you're determined to prove something. So I'd recommend you get and read more on that study. I wish we had time to go on into other stuff. There's a lot more cavemen. In the next course, we'll teach another 10-week course on this. We'll finish up about the cavemen and the Garden of Eden, what it was like. Not only were the people living longer, the animals were living longer. And the fish were living longer. Everything was much larger before the flood. We'll get into more of that in the next course. But I think that we've got the wrong idea in our textbooks. We're teaching the kids that man used to be small and he's evolving and getting bigger, when all the evidence is quite the opposite. And there are some folks like Smithsonian and some professors in universities who don't want kids to be exposed to any evidence against their theory. And so there is a real battle going on. And I hope you enjoy studying all that. If you have some people who've gone to anthropology class at the university and they've been taught evolution, you might want to get them this book, Buried Alive, or another one we'll get into next time called Bones of Contention, which is a tremendous book about all of the so-called cavemen. It's got a chapter on Neanderthals and a chapter on Lucy and a chapter on other ones, but we'll get into that later. We offer that through our ministry. Okay, God made a perfect world. Why? Well, he must have wanted our fellowship or something. I don't know. He wants us to love him. But he gave man a free choice. He had to do that, I think. Of course, God doesn't have to do anything, but I believe he did that because he could have made us robots, right? He could have made us like a computer or a tape recorder. You can speak into a tape recorder. I love you, I love you, I love you, and play it back. I love you, I love you, I love you. Ah, thank you, thank you. Doesn't mean anything, does it? You know, my wife is 5 foot tall. I'm 6'1". I can come home and grab her around the throat and say, you tell me you love me. Well, what's her choice, you know? It doesn't mean anything, though, does it? It's a lot better when I come home and she says, hi, dear, I sure love you. Wow. See, she doesn't have to. She wants to. And we don't have to serve God. If you don't want to serve God, you don't have to. He's not going to make you. He gave you a free choice. Now, when we do decide to serve God, now that means something. So if he would have just said, everybody serve God, well, okay, he could have done that, programmed us. But I think it was wise for him to give us that freedom of choice. And they chose the wrong thing. They chose to disobey. So then the curse came into the world. The Bible doesn't talk much about the curse, but there was a curse when things began to change, you know. And then that messed up the world. Then you have a flood, which really messes up the world. That destroyed things big time. And a lot of people are looking at the world today and assuming this is the same way it looked to Adam and Eve. Totally wrong idea. They had a very different world, probably very different looking sky, very different looking plant life, much larger animals, and probably much larger people. And we're going into all that next course. God made the world, man wrecked it, but in his mercy and his love, God decided to come down in the form of a man and die on the cross to pay for our sins. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus was born and grew up, lived a perfect life, died on the cross to pay for my sins and yours. And if you'll accept that payment that he made, your sins can be forgiven. You can be regened. You can be made a new person, regenerated. So 1969, February 9th, I said, Lord, I'm a sinner. I'd like you to forgive me and save me. And he made a brand new person. The problem is, he left the old person there too. So there are now two Kent Hovinds that live in this body. There's the one that wants to do everything wrong, and there's the one that wants to do everything right. And they fight all the time. And whichever one I feed the most generally wins. That's a decision you'll have to make too. First, you got to make sure you got the Lord in your heart. If you're not saved, you ought to give your heart to Jesus and get saved. After that, it's your job to feed that new person and starve the old person. Paul said, I die daily. Every day you got to crucify that old man, the flesh, that wants to do everything wrong. One quick illustration and we'll quit. Suppose your kitchen sink was broken. Water is squirting every place. You call me up. Brother Hovind, my sink is broken. You know how to do plumbing? Oh man, I've done a lot of plumbing. I love it. I got the tools. I'll be right over. So I grab my toolbox, run over, knock on the door, and you say, oh, Brother Hovind, I'm so glad you're here. Man, that sink, the kitchen's a mess. The water's going every place. But listen, I haven't had time to clean the house, Brother Hovind. I really don't want you to come in. Can you stay outside and fix it for me? No. The first thing you have to do, you have to let me in, right? Now, as soon as you let me in, does that mean it is fixed? No, but that means I can start working on it, right? Now, when I'm working on it, you have two choices. You can help me, you know, hold the flashlight, hand me the tools, whatever. Or you can make life more difficult for me, can't you? Turn the water back on, you know, steal my tools, slam the cabinet door or something, you know. Once you get Jesus into your heart, that doesn't mean everything's fixed, but it means he can start working on it. And so in 1969, I said, Lord, I'd like you to come in and save me, and he did. Doesn't mean everything's fixed, but it means he's in there working. And now I've got a choice to help him out, you know, or to make it harder on him. His goal is to make me like Jesus. Oh, he's got a long ways to go, but he's patient. He's still working on it, okay? That's his goal for you too. And he's going to take you to heaven one day and finish the job. He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it. He will finish the job. Some of God's children, he takes them home and crowns them. Others, he crowns them and takes them home. Oh, a child of God, huh? You're not acting like one. Why don't you come on home up here? I can keep a better eye on you, you know, and take you on home to heaven. So I think that's what happens. Okay, we'll get into much more about the creation later. It looks like at the rate we're going, this course is going to be several more courses before we finish the whole seminar. I want you to feel free to ask any questions you have. You folks watching the videotape, feel free to call. I get lots of emails and letters. It's much faster if you just pick up the phone and call. I'm usually in the office Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we'll be glad to take your call and answer any questions I can. Thank you so much. Hope you had a good time in the course.